Tonight's guest on Spectacle is one of America's most gifted pianists and composers. His classical training and boundless curiosity has driven a remarkable career in jazz, at times redefining what the very word jazz includes. During his time at Blue Note Records, he not only recorded a series of acclaimed albums as a band leader, but also contributed piano to many of the greatest jazz records of the era. His desire to engage with new sights and sounds gave him one of the very first major rock video hits with Rocket. In early 2008, his album River, The Joni Letters, new interpretations of songs by Joni Mitchell, received the Grammy for Album of the Year, only the second record by a jazz artist to do so. He is a masterful musician, innovator, educator. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Mr. Herbie Hancock. Thank you so much for joining me on Spectacle.
Thank you for inviting me. I was on a weird tour rough tour, when I got the call about this show. And I was thinking, how am I gonna do this? You know, I had so much going on, but I said, I gotta figure out a way to do it. And we did it.
Well, we're here in the world-famous Apollo Theater in Harlem, which is another great reason to be making this show, to do this show in this place. For a lot of people like myself who grew up in, I suppose, I would say the beat group era, not even rock and roll era, because the Beatles and all of that kind of music. Right. And with rhythm and blues, the Apollo is really associated with James Brown. But Smokey Robinson was here as a guest on Spectacle, and he reminded me, of course, the history of the Apollo goes back to jazz. Ella Fitzgerald made her debut here. There was a whole class of jazz musicians from the very beginnings who had a great sense of being revolutionary musicians and entertainers, or people who were capable of expressing themselves to a broad audience. Louis Armstrong, Duke Ellington.
I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for Louis Armstrong.
Yeah. And I believe in your era, you also, while playing the most rigorous music imaginable, have that sense of the audience. Is that true? You have that sense of wanting to communicate?
Oh, absolutely. I'm interested in human beings and what kinds of avenues I can find that can possibly relate to people on various levels.
But you began with classical music.
Right.
You're a classically trained pianist. Mm-hmm. Miles Davis was quoted as saying that he went to the library to look at classical scores when he was coming up. Mm-hmm. And was surprised that other jazz musicians didn't do so. Now, there are a few notable jazz musicians who don't read music, but most of them do.
Right.
But not all of them invest in a curiosity in classical music. Do you feel it gave you extra ammunition as a composer to study these fundamentals and the works of the classics?
Well, for me, because I started with classical music, even though I started taking classical piano lessons, I was also listening to rhythm and blues. I'm from Chicago.
Yeah.
You know, if you're from Chicago, you're gonna hear the blues. Yeah. Yeah. So I was listening to both classical music and rhythm and blues. But jazz, I wasn't into because I thought you had to be older to play jazz. You know, you had to be at least 19. You know. But then, when I was about 14, at one of the concerts at my high school, there was a guy who was in my class that had a jazz trio. And he was improvising on my instrument, the piano. So here's a guy in my class that could do something I couldn't do on my instrument. And it sounded good, too. I like the beat, you know.
Because it is hard. People don't realize that if you walk up to a classical pianist and take away the music, some of them can't carry on playing.
Yeah, for the most part, they can't. And for me, what classical music did was to give me a foundation about just the mechanics of music and structure of music. So by the time I got to jazz, I already had that kind of foundation. I also had been trained in having a correct posture. There are a lot of musicians that have wound up with troubles with their shoulders or with their backs or necks, and sometimes they've gotten to be very serious problems over the years. But I've never had any problems with, oops, sorry. No. No, I've never had, no, I never had any problems with my body playing the instrument. And I think it's because I sit correctly and because I use my fingers correctly.
Pianistic technique is, you would say, there is a different matter between jazz musicians and classical musicians, subtly speaking. But obviously...
I had to learn.
Yeah.
I had to learn how to swing. Because when I came up in jazz, they didn't have jazz taught in schools. I think there was one school in America that taught jazz, and it was a college. But, and it was in California. It wasn't in Chicago. So I had to learn jazz from the streets, from the other musicians, and from listening to records and copying things off of records. I would listen to things that I liked and what's he playing? How's he doing that? And
transcribing.
Transcribing it, yeah. And then I would transcribe the notes and sit and play the notes and then listen to what the jazz pianist was playing. It would be the same notes, but it didn't sound the same. You know, his was swinging and mine wasn't. And why? How is he doing that?
So you've combined your classical discipline with what you learned and the huge career that you had to date and continuing in jazz. There's one record from 1998 where these two worlds collide, Gershwin's world. It's a record I really found incredible.
Yeah.
So you must have held it in your heart, is that true to say, the idea of examining Gershwin in this way?
Yeah, he certainly is a seminal figure in American music and bridging also across to classical music. And I actually called the record Gershwin's World because if it wasn't for jazz, who would know who Gershwin was?
Is there a Gershwin song that is close to your heart that you can play a few bars of just to hear how it works upon your imagination?
Yeah, I was just thinking about the song Embraceable You. I mean, so many people love that song, you know. And actually on my record, I reharmonize it in such a special way that I always had to have the music there because I could never remember what I did with it, you know. And since I don't have the music here of that particular harmonization, I'm not even gonna try try it that way. But Gershwin's music always had amazing harmonic interest, you know, and let's see if I can do a little movement. So forth, yeah.
In 1960, I think, you had a hit record with your first, derived from your very first album as a leader. So Watermelon Man, which was a big hit with the groovy pop crowd and groovy R&B crowd as well, beyond jazz musicians. Did you have a sense when you were recording that this might travel out?
Well, actually, at the time, I was Donald Byrd's roommate, great jazz trumpeter from Detroit. And I was really his protege. Yeah, he discovered me and brought me from Chicago to New York to play in his band. He was the one that told me, okay, it's time for you to do your first record as a leader. I said, no, I'm not ready. He said, you're ready. So he said, here's how it works with record companies. He said, half the record is for you, half is for the record company. And I said, what does that mean? He says, well, half the tunes can be your originals and the other three have to be something that people actually know or get a sense of, that they know, So I said, let me wonder if I can approach that. And I started thinking about what can I write honestly about the Black experience, my own personal Black experience, since the funky sound really comes from the Black experience, What can I write about? I couldn't write about chain gangs because I'd never been to jail, I couldn't write about work songs because I hadn't worked in the cotton fields. I was born in Chicago, right? The Watermelon Man. What could be more ethnic than that? The Watermelon Man going through the alleys of Chicago. So I said, well, how can I capture that feeling of the Watermelon Man? And I started thinking about the cobblestone alleys of Chicago. That it was a horse-drawn wagon and the cart going over the cobblestones. Maybe I can capture something that has a rhythm that's inspired by that. That's how I came up with it. That was a rhythmic thing. Well, and then I started thinking about what did the Watermelon Man say? What kind of melody did he? Because he would sing something.
Yeah.
But it was watermelon, red, ripe watermelons, and some little song. And I said, but that's not really that melodic in a song sense. And I started thinking, what about the ladies leaning over their back porch saying, hey, Watermelon Man. And I started thinking, hey, Watermelon Man. That's how I came up with it. Watermelon Man. That's how I came up with that. But what I didn't know was something that I found out, again, thanks to Donald Byrd, when he had a conversation with Mongo Santa Maria, when I played for my first time with a Latin group. And Mongo Santa Maria, a great Cuban conguero that passed away quite a few years ago, they were having a conversation about relationship between Afro-Cuban and Afro-American music. And Mongo had said that he never found a thing that was really the link between the two. So I'm half hearing the conversation, and finally Donald says, hey, Herbie, why don't you play Watermelon Man for Mongo? So I went up on the piano and I started playing. And I started playing this, and little by little, the musicians started picking it up. Pretty soon, everybody was dancing. Mongo got on his congas. When he got on his congas, all of a sudden something clicked. And he said, it's a Wahira beat, and it worked with Watermelon Man perfectly.
And so, now we'd call it world music, but I mean, it was just a spontaneous,
yeah.
Spontaneous
so it became
beat.
a huge hit, not only here in the States, but all over Latin America, too.
Well, could we try?
Okay, here we go with Watermelon Man. First, we're going to do it a little bit, the kind of original way that I wrote it back in 1962. And then we're going to switch to a version that's more like what the Headhunters did in 19 73.
did anybody ever sort of say, well, okay, this Watermelon Man, we better have Return of the Watermelon Man, or, you know, there wasn't, you just moved straight on and did other songs and other records with quite different concepts, you know?
Well, actually, what I tried to do, well, first of all, I didn't say that Mongo Santa Maria recorded Watermelon Man, and his record became a top 10 hit.
Yeah.
You know, and so when that was a huge hit, that was at the same time that I had joined Miles Davis's band.
So you didn't need to think about that right now at that moment, I guess.
I mean, but how? I mean, I was thinking, it doesn't get better than this. Here
No.
I am playing with the top band in jazz, and I walk down the streets of New York, and all I'm hearing is my song Watermelon Man playing in everybody's window. And I was 23 years old when I joined Miles's band, so I felt pretty good about that.
Youth was a characteristic that really marked what people call now the great second Miles Davis quintet. It was a very young group. You know, can you tell us what the call was like? You know, either was it a call or a meeting to recruit
when I got
you?
called by Miles?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. It was very funny because I was still living in the Bronx, you know, with Donald Byrd and his 5-story walk-up on Teasdale Place, you know, and there was this rumor going around that Miles was looking for me, and I didn't believe that. No way. You know, why would Miles be looking for me, you know? And, but as the weeks passed by, Donald Byrd says to me, well, Herbie, when Miles calls, tell him you're not working with anybody. I said, wait a minute. I said, first of all, Miles Davis is not going to call me. Secondly, I'm working with you, Donald. I mean, you have opened up so many opportunities for me. You got me my contract with Blue Note, and you discovered me. And he said, shut up. He said, I couldn't look at myself in the mirror if I felt that I stood in the way of you having that great opportunity for your career. So he said, if Miles Davis called, tell him you're not working with anybody. Within about 30 minutes, the phone rings, and there's this voice. So it was Miles Davis, and the first question he says, you working with anybody? I said,
Donald Byrd didn't have a second line, did he? He hadn't been calling out on the second line.
and when Miles says, you working with anybody? I said, no. And anyway, he said, look, when you come over to my house tomorrow at 1:30, click.
And that's it?
He hung up.
Yeah.
I didn't have his address, I didn't have his phone number. You know, so I'm sweating, you know, and about 15 minutes later, Tony Williams, the great drummer, who wound up being in that quintet of Miles, he called me, and he said, Herbie, did Miles call you? I said, yeah. He said, call me too, yeah. We're both like kids going, woo. And so Tony had Miles's address, and yeah,
But I mean, you were, what age were you?
I didn't rate it.
When you say we were like kids, what age were you? You were not.
I was 23.
You were
Tony
20.
was 17.
That's what I mean. He really was a kid.
Yeah, he really was a kid.
Incredible drummer, and at 17.
Unbelievable.
I mean,
and the next day we went over to Miles's house, and Miles has a recreation room in his basement. And so we went down there. Ron Carter, the great bass player, was there. George Coleman, great saxophonist, he was there. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, the saxophone chair is perhaps the most intimidating one, because Miles, as a younger man, had the experience of being the novice musician with Charlie Parker. Right. And then the previous quintet that had been so celebrated featured John Coltrane. Yeah. So anybody that's going to be playing the saxophone with Miles Davis it's got to be pretty good. Yeah. And when did it become the quintet with Wayne Shorter?
The following year, which was 1964, Wayne joined the band. And because of the way that the band was evolving, Wayne was the perfect figure to fit into the band at that time.
The evolution of the band is in terms of repertoire, because was there a conscious statement by Miles? There's just not going to be any standards played. Original compositions, not just by him, but by yourself, by Wayne Shorter, start to make up the bulk of the repertoire.
Well, this is what made one of the reasons that Miles was such a great teacher, because he always encouraged the musicians to contribute their compositions to the band. You know, and sometimes those compositions were pretty rough, and sometimes they were pretty bad. And Miles had a way of taking something that was bad and turning it into a gem.
It's not something that's commented on that much, that his abilities as an arranger, although it's a small group, is the ability to recognize in the germ of these ideas the potential to take it further.
You're absolutely right. And I think what Miles was demonstrating is his interest in encouraging his young musicians to develop themselves, because and for the sound of the band to be one that is not dictated by him, but one that is a collaborative effort from the members of the band. And so in encouraging us to write compositions, as well as, of course, to improvise them, so much of our own personality and our own selves were included in those compositions, and Miles welcomed that. When you get a composer like Wayne Shorter coming in the band, and he's writing something that's cutting edge.
You've been quoted as saying he was the best composer in the quintet.
Oh, Miles never had to change a note of Wayne's music. It was always just as Wayne wrote it, because he always it was already there.
What was the first composition of Wayne Shorter's that really made you feel that way?
Nefertiti is like a perfect example of something that Wayne wrote that just fit that band.
Your careers have run parallel and overlap. You're going to play a little? Oh, he wants.
So forth, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Beautiful composition.
That movement there is, the way you just stop that movement is exquisite. You had a huge success with a film soundtrack that starred, I think, a person who had played at the very beginning of your career, Dexter Gordon, in the film Round Midnight. What was that experience like to see somebody that you knew, you'd worked with, portraying a character, I suppose you might say, quite close to himself in some ways, on the screen? I mean, this was quite an extraordinary choice on the part of the director to go with the actual person. It's very rare for that to happen.
Yeah. Bertrand Tavernier, the director, told me that when he saw Dexter Gordon's walk, he knew that was the character, that was the person that he needed for the main character.
There was no actor that could really carry it that way.
Midnight. Yeah.
You won the Academy Award for your soundtrack for this film. That must have been a very big night.
It was a huge night. It was, you know, I was just thinking about this, that when I was 18 years old, that's when the Grammys started. But the Oscars started long before I was born. And so for me, the Oscars were like the major thing, you know, and so I have this one Oscar, right? And so I have a place where I put awards, you know, and it sits at the top shelf, you know, and right in the front space. And I thought nothing would ever be able to make that Oscar be in the background until I got Album of the Year. Oscar went back.
Well, nevertheless, would you play something from that soundtrack?
Oh, I'd love to.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, this is a tune called Chan Song. Yeah, you just start it. Yeah.
Beautiful, Herbie, thank you. In the 1980s, you made a very extraordinary collaboration with, it was sort of an audio-visual collaboration in a way, which had massive success. You made a record, and one of the songs from it, Rocket, it actually won 5 MTV awards at the first VMAs. I mean, it's not something that's you know, this is a period of time where music video was just starting to be the way in which people heard a lot of music. But you were represented in the video by a robot. Did the humor of that video clip appeal to you? Did you have input into the, you know, the representation?
Number one, I had no input into the creation of that video because I didn't particularly want any input. I didn't understand anything about making music videos. And I remember watching it the first time. I didn't have a clue as to what it was about and whether it was good or what, you know, and I had no idea. And then I presented it to the record company. They were flipping out. They loved it. Oh, congratulations. And I, what? Is it any good? You know, I had no idea. It shows you how stupid I am.
Well, I don't think that's the case, set against some of the videos of the time. And also, on the musical side of that record, I mean, you introduced, really for a lot of years, you might have actually introduced scratching into a lot of people's experience. So there were sounds that you were getting from the very earliest years of hip-hop. Now,
I just saw DXT, the guy who was the DJ on Rocket, today. And he did much more than just scratch on the record. A lot of the sounds that you hear on Rocket are from records that he introduced into the
So it's really
mix.
mixing, in mixing as it's come to be now. I mean, it was...
Right. Well, you know what I did with Rocket, and what I always try to do, if I'm writing a song that, the type of song that might have appeal to a larger audience, I try to look for ways to slick things in there. Yeah. You know, some things that might be outside the box, so to speak. I mean, we got a song that's, you know, in A or A minor or A major, however you want to look at it. I mean, the bass line's like that, but the melody is, no. That doesn't happen too much in rock and roll, that you'd have the 9th on the downbeat. You know, so that was one thing I wanted to do. And it's, I used an idea that I had figured out kind of for myself, and I noticed in other songs, about simplicity. You know, taking a simple idea, simple concept. In this case, it was 2 notes. 2 notes. 2 notes. But the second 2 notes are more inside. But the first 2 notes, that's a little bit outside. And then after that is more or less a resolution of it. But it still has its quirkiness.
In the last few years, you've made a couple of very contrasting records. A record like New Standard, the songs that you interpreted there, I don't think anybody would pretend that they have the harmonic sophistication of a Gershwin song, but they give you some other sense of possibilities other than just being contemporary songs.
Well, when I did the album, The New Standard, what I was attempting to do was to beg the question, will we 2,000 years from now be talking about the standards being Cole Porter's tunes and George Gershwin's tunes? Or will there ever be standards by other people? As a matter of fact, the standards were called jazz at the time that they were written. That was the music. It was, the word pop music didn't come up till later, you know. But it was, I mean, Frank Sinatra was a jazz singer, you know. And so I started thinking about that, and I said, why don't I just take some tunes by writers today and turn them into jazz tunes, not just jazz them up. That's
quite a different.
That's why I added that's why I reharmonized so many things. Plus, I enjoy reharmonizing songs anyway. I mean, I did the same thing with one of Johnny Mitchell's tunes.
Yeah, well, it brings us to this top shelf of yours where the most hallowed award sits in your house. So you mentioned the Oscar being moved aside for the Grammy for Album of the Year. I think this is a wonderful achievement for you, obviously, and it is interpretations, both vocal and instrumental, of Joni Mitchell's songs.
She not only writes the lyrics, but she writes the arrangements. She's very much involved in the selection of the instruments and of course, the harmonies for her song. So every part of the process of Joni making a song that stems from the lyrics, every nuance that's in the arrangement and every nuance in the melody has to do with that lyric. And I think that's what makes her music so personal and so difficult for someone else in a lot of cases to do.
Well, at the risk of incurring her wrath, would we dare? You had a beautiful recording, very surprising, I think, to a lot of people on the record, was the recording of one particular song was with Tina Turner, and I don't believe anybody had ever heard Tina Turner sing a song of this character, and the actual vocal delivery was still distinctively her, but it wasn't something that people would immediately imagine when they said Tina Turner. You know.
Well, I had heard from Larry Klein, who was the record producer, that Joni was very much a fan of Tina Turner's, which I didn't know about that. So I was delighted when Tina agreed to actually do the song.
Would we risk?
Kingpin.
Well, it's a beautiful rendition. Can we possibly risk singing it together? It's an absolute thrill to be speaking with you this evening on Spectacle. And I thank you for your time, your beautiful playing. And once again, on the bass, Christian McBride. On the drums, Karriem Riggins. Mr. Herbie Hancock. Okay.
Big man who rides, disco dancers greet him, plainclothes cops greet him, small town big man, fresh lipstick glistening, sophomore jive from victims of typewriters. The band sounds like typewriter. The big man, he's not listening. His eyes hold Edith, his left hand holds his right. What does that hand desire? That he grips it so tight. Edith and the ring, the passed over girls are conferring. The man with the diamond ring is purring. All claws far now withdrawn. One by one they bring his renegade stories to her, his crimes and his glories to her. In challenge they look on. When he has taken roll too soon, they tilt their tired faces gently to the spoon. song, some mysterious song. Bars in her head, beating frantic and snowblind, romantic and snowblind. She says his crime belongs. Edith and the kingpin, each with charm to sway, are staring eye to eye. They dare not look away. No, they dare not look away.
Now we got it. Now we got it.
Yeah, now we got it.
To Herbie Hancock.
Yeah, man. Thank you.
Christian McBride. Karriem Riggins.